One warning, just one quiet, controlled, almost clinical sentence, and everything Meghan Markle thought she was walking into at Highgrove collapsed in less than an hour.
Page 6 is reporting that Meghan Markle felt humiliated on Prince Harry's most recent UK trip, and that the trip turned into a nightmare, forcing Markle and her children to return home to California earlier than they had hoped.
Remember, 47 minutes is not a reconciliation. It's not a get-together, we're so thrilled to see you.
And her husband lost big in court. No one wants to be seen on the arm of a loser. I think that this trip was a reality check. Harry has spent years insisting he can be half in and half out of the monarchy.
Breaking today, Meghan Markle's fashion freeze out. She has been dumped by Balenciaga just 1 year after she thought, this I'm going to invite myself appearance at Paris Fashion Week was going to change her career for good.
Another point to make is Harry and Meghan were kept waiting, encircling Highgrove for some considerable length of time, not even sure that the meeting was going to take place.
Noticeably, one person was not at the show. His supposed good friend and collaborator, according to her, the Duchess of Sussex. And this is where it gets juicy. Paula's source revealed. Oh God, no! She was not invited. Not after what happened last time.
She didn't leave because the meeting ended. She left because the message landed. Hard, final, unmistakable, and the silence that followed was louder than anything said inside that room. Because what happened in those 47 minutes wasn't a reconciliation, it wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't even a family moment, it was a line being drawn, and she understood it the second she stepped back outside. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because before those gates even opened, the entire setup was already telling a story nobody wanted to say out loud. The waiting, the circling, the delay that wasn't an accident, the kind of delay that sends a message without speaking. You don't control this. You don't set the terms anymore. You wait.
And the nightmare wasn't just the trip. It was discovering that the privilege of royalty, doesn't automatically survive after you quit your job.
It doesn't. And that was, I thought, the reaction. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't hate from the British public. It was just disinterest, which I think they probably despise more than anything because they want attention.
Hours of driving, not minutes. Hours, that's not logistics, that's choreography. That's power being demonstrated in the quietest, most controlled way possible. And while she sat there outside watching time slip, something else was happening inside, something strategic, something deliberate. Prince Harry wasn't brought in together. He was taken in alone, separated, isolated, positioned, and that separation, it wasn't random. It said everything. We'll talk to him. You stay there.
We kind of know that Meghan and Harry are simply not good for anyone, really, apart from themselves now. They are a couple that are in a rapid decline. I mean, as I said, the Emmy thing will not change anything. It won't matter what they're doing because ultimately everybody's now seen the act.
Because by the time those doors opened, the outcome had already been decided. This wasn't a moment to rebuild anything. This was a moment to redefine everything. And what Meghan Markle walked into emotionally, financially, strategically, it wasn't what she had been betting on for years. Not even close. For 7 years, a narrative had been built, repeated, defended, expanded. We left for protection. We left for truth. We left because we had to. But slowly, publicly, that narrative had started to crack. The contradictions piling up, appearances not aligning, moves that didn't match the message.
97 claims, 97 claims against the Daily Mail were thrown out.
Yes, because the evidence wasn't there, and as we've learnt, suspicion is one thing. I've got a lot of suspicion about Harry and his teams. I really do. But that's not evidence. And you can't go to court. So it's amazing that the lawyers, and I find 50 million for this case extraordinary. Somebody is milking the system.
And by the time she arrived at Highgrove, that pressure had reached a breaking point. Deals falling apart, partnerships fading, legal defeats stacking. The kind of pressure that doesn't just sit quietly in the background, it follows you into rooms, into conversations, into decisions.
This was, in their minds, Harry and Meghan's redemption, their big return, and how they were going to turn things around. They were no longer going to poll next to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. They were coming home, and everybody was going to be thrilled to see them. And then you had Chris Shipp and Allison Hammond and all those regular characters elevating this myth. But unfortunately for Meghan, everything just blew up in their faces.
So when Palace insiders started whispering that she needed this meeting, not emotionally, but strategically, it made sense. One moment, one image, one signal that she was still inside, still connected, still relevant. But that's not what she got. Because the first real shift didn't happen at the end of the meeting. It happened the moment she realized this wasn't a conversation, it was a controlled encounter. Timed, measured, limited, 47 minutes. Not 45, not 50, 47. Precise, almost surgical. No meal, no warmth, no photos, no lingering moments, just protocol. And then came the part nobody expected, the part that turned everything. The warning, not loud, not dramatic, but clear enough that it didn't need to be repeated. A condition, a boundary, something that made it unmistakably obvious nothing was changing. And suddenly, everything she thought she could regain in that room status, validation, position just wasn't there, because there were no cameras, no smiles, no gestures that could be reshaped into headlines, no moment to hold on to, nothing to take back and build a narrative around. And that's when it hit. This wasn't a return, this was a reminder. She walked in expecting one version of reality and walked out facing another. And outside those walls, the contrast was already unfolding in real time. Prince William moving effortlessly through public life, looking grounded, stable, completely within the system. Catherine appearing without needing to prove anything, without needing to control the moment. And inside that comparison, something shifted, because legitimacy doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't need to be negotiated. It simply exists. And in that moment, standing outside Highgrove, watching how everything had been structured, it became clear she wasn't part of that structure anymore. The warning wasn't just about behavior. It wasn't just about optics. It was about position, about understanding exactly where she stood now. Not inside, not equal, not in control. And when someone realizes that in real time, when the entire framework they've been operating under suddenly disappears, the reaction isn't always visible. Sometimes it's quiet. Controlled, fast 47 minutes. That's all it took. Because once the message was delivered, there was nothing left to stay for. No negotiation to continue. No opportunity to extend. No illusion left to hold on to. So she left, not slowly, not ceremonially, but quickly, deliberately, because staying longer wouldn't have changed anything. And maybe that's the most revealing part of all, because it wasn't the exit that mattered. It was what forced it. And what happened in those 47 minutes didn't just end a meeting, and what makes that exit even more unsettling is that it didn't happen in isolation. It connected directly to everything that had been building long before Highgrove, because those 47 minutes were never just about a meeting. They were the collision point of years of pressure, contradictions, and a narrative that had slowly begun collapsing under its own weight. And the moment that warning was delivered inside that room, it didn't just end the conversation, it triggered a realization that had been approaching for months, quietly, steadily, and impossible to ignore once it arrived. Because while that meeting was being framed as an opportunity, something to reset, something to reestablish connection, the reality surrounding it had already shifted beyond repair, with deals quietly disappearing, influence fading in spaces that once seemed open, and credibility being tested in ways that no longer favored the same outcomes. And that's where the sequence becomes impossible to separate, because the Highgrove moment doesn't stand alone. It sits directly on top of everything that came before it, everything that had already started to unravel in ways that couldn't be reversed with a single appearance or a carefully managed image. And that's exactly why the absence of something became more powerful than anything that actually happened, because there was no photograph, no shared moment, no visual proof that could be interpreted or reshaped into a different narrative. And in a situation where perception had always been a central tool, the removal of that possibility changed everything, leaving nothing to build from, nothing to reinterpret, nothing to present as a shift in position. And that silence became the loudest outcome of all, because it confirmed that whatever had been hoped for inside that meeting simply didn't exist anymore. At the same time, outside that controlled environment, the contrast was becoming sharper by the hour. with Prince William and Catherine moving through their roles without disruption, without hesitation, and without needing to prove anything to anyone, reinforcing a structure that didn't rely on negotiation or adjustment, but on continuity, and that contrast wasn't subtle. It was immediate, visible, and impossible to ignore once the Highgrove meeting ended, because it highlighted a difference that no explanation could fully bridge, a difference between being part of something and standing outside it trying to re-enter. And that's where the warning takes on a deeper meaning, because it wasn't just about that moment, it wasn't limited to that room, it was about everything moving forward, about understanding boundaries that were no longer flexible, about recognizing that the position once assumed to be recoverable had shifted into something else entirely, something fixed, something defined. And once that realization takes hold, it doesn't leave space for negotiation, it leaves space only for reaction, and that reaction in this case was immediate departure. Because staying longer would have implied something different, it would have suggested there was still ground to cover, still terms to discuss, still something left to shape. But the structure of those 47 minutes made it clear that none of that existed, that the meeting had a beginning, a middle, and a definitive end that didn't extend beyond what had already been set. And when someone recognizes that in real time, the decision to leave isn't emotional, it's strategic, it's acknowledgement, it's understanding that nothing further can be gained by remaining. And what followed only reinforced that reality, because the signals didn't soften after the meeting, they became more defined, more structured, more aligned with a system that had already made its adjustments quietly and without public declaration, and those adjustments didn't require explanation. They didn't need to be announced loudly, that because their impact was already visible in how everything else was unfolding, in how roles were being maintained, in how presence was being managed, and in how absence was being reinforced. That's why the Highgrove moment keeps echoing beyond those gates, because it wasn't dramatic in the way people expected, it didn't explode into headlines in real time, it didn't create an immediate spectacle, but it did something far more consequential. It clarified positions, it removed ambiguity, and it revealed a structure that had already moved forward without needing to look back. And once that becomes clear, the story doesn't end with the exit, it expands into everything that comes after it. Because the real tension isn't in what was said, it's in what wasn't offered, in what wasn't extended, in what didn't happen despite every expectation that it might. And that absence reshapes everything. It reframes the entire situation, turning what could have been interpreted as a step forward into something entirely different, something final in a way that doesn't need to be declared to be understood. And that's why those 47 minutes continue to hold weight, not because of their length, but because of their precision, because of how controlled they were, how deliberate every element felt, how nothing extended beyond what had already been decided, and how quickly everything concluded once that decision had been communicated, leaving no room for reinterpretation, no space for a different outcome, and no opportunity to turn it into something else afterward.